All right, I'm booting up the live stream. Takes a minute.
Did anything happen?
Okay, we should be live.
Yes, it's good. I see it.
Great. Welcome everybody to our October coalition meeting. Let me just take a second to make sure that I'm able to see whatever screen I need to see. And I need to look at the, okay. Again,
Am I still on mute?
you are not on mute, Olive. We can hear you loud and clear, and welcome to the Upper West Side Coalition's October meeting. And all of you, let us know if you have anything that you want to share. We'll make you a co-host so you can share your screen if that's necessary. Otherwise, we'll go to you when it's your turn to share on the panel. Okay.
Everybody's picture is there and mine isn't. Did I do something wrong?
You might start your video on the lower left corner of your screen. That might help. But let's get started, and then we'll help you. We'll help you when we get to your part of the forum, if that's all right. There you are. We see you, Olive.
Okay.
Welcome.
Hi.
So all of this said, we're going to have a conversation about land use. And again, welcome to the coalition's October meeting. Please stay muted, coalition members and panelists. If you have community news to share, we're going to do that at the end. You'll have a chance to do it at the end. As you know, the Upper West Side Coalition was launched earlier this year with the intention of supporting block associations and the creation of new block associations. I think we're currently talking with about 19 different community groups from 59th to 110th on the West Side. And we share a commitment to raise awareness and information around areas of concern for the Upper West Side residents, including tonight's topic, land use. A part of land use looks at housing, and we intend to get to that at another time. This conversation will be mostly about zoning and construction issues. So I'd like to turn it over to our programming chair, Liz DeVito, who's going to moderate this panel. And again, welcome everybody.
Okay, thanks, Chris, and good evening, everybody. Thanks for attending. Just for your information, this video will be available for replay starting tomorrow. So if you have friends who wanted to listen, they can start listening tomorrow. But I don't want to waste too much time with introductions. I think you know that we have a case study approach to tonight's topic about overconstruction and community activism on the Upper West Side. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with Lizette Chaparro, who is the Director of Land Use for the Manhattan Borough President's Office. She is going to give us an overview of the ULURP process. That's the Uniform Land Use Review Procedure. And it's the process by which applications affecting the land use of the city are publicly reviewed. So Lizette, I'm going to hand it right over to you right now.
Thanks, Chris and Liz, for inviting me this evening, and thanks to all the members of the coalition for having me. As Liz said, I'm the Director of Land Use for Manhattan Borough President Gail Brewer. I'm going to share my screen now. I've got just a brief PowerPoint that I'll share with you all tonight. Can everyone see the PowerPoint in full screen now? Yes, okay, great, thank you. Okay, so tonight I'll give a very general overview of ULURP, the Uniform Land Use Review Procedure. It's essentially the public review process for a number of actions that require discretionary approval. Some of those actions include zoning map changes, changes to the city map. So that would be related to parks or mapping or demapping streets. It also includes the acquisition or disposition of city property. Neighborhood rezonings are also applications that go through ULURP. Special permits that are granted by the City Planning Commission, site selection for city facilities, as well as changes to urban renewal plans. Before an application is certified into ULURP, it goes through a pre-certification process, right? So the applicant can either be a private applicant or it can be the city. When it's the city, it's usually a city agency acting as the lead applicant, even if there is an application that is being coordinated among several city agencies. And there are a series of steps that they go through with the staff of the Department of City Planning in order to prepare that application. So there are informational meetings. The applicant then has to prepare an application statement. And then at that point, the package of actions is decided on. Sometimes, for example, if there is an affordable housing site and it is a city-owned site, there's disposition action, but there may also be an action to upzone that parcel. So oftentimes these applications come with a set of actions that are being requested by the applicant. And in this chart, you do see in the lighter blue is the process that sort of tracks the preparation of that application with the Department of City Planning. And in the darker blue is the process for the environmental document that has to be submitted in conjunction with that application. So as the applicant is drafting the application, getting comments from the Department of City Planning on things like as you'll see it at the bottom, in the first dark blue table, the reasonable worst case development scenario. There are different elements that are included as part of the environmental review for an application that require feedback from the Department of City Planning. And there are multiple iterations that go back and forth and get reviewed by the Department of City Planning. Eventually, when that package then is complete, the application is then deemed ready for certification. And that is essentially what begins the ULURP process. So the first step is that application is brought before the Department of City Planning. And in a review session, the City Planning Commission then deems that application ready and certifies it, or sometimes we say they refer it out to the community boards. And that is essentially what starts the ULURP clock ticking. ULURP is a process that is, it sort of has its parameters, and they're laid out in this slide here. So once an application is certified, the community board then has 60 days to do two things. The first is to hold a public hearing on that application. And just to clarify here, when I say that application, that includes, as I mentioned earlier, it can include more than one action, but for shorthand, we just refer to it as one single application, right? The community board also issues a recommendation. And then upon that recommendation being submitted, the application then goes to the borough president, who has 30 days to, if they choose to hold a public hearing, they can, and then also issue their recommendation. And then after that, the City Planning Commission has a review session on that application to get a presentation and review the elements of the application. They hold a public hearing as well on that application, and then they can vote to approve, disapprove, but they can also make modifications to that application. And then finally, the application then goes to the city council, which has 50 days to, again, hold a public hearing and then vote to approve, disapprove, and they can also make modifications to that application. I do want to note here that there is the concept of speeding up a ULURP clock. If, for example, the community board happens to meet the week after an application is certified and they're very eager to see this application move forward, they could hold a hearing and vote within 30, even 40 days. They don't have to take the full 60 days. Same thing with the borough president and the city planning commission and the council. This is just the maximum number of days that each of these stakeholders can have in their review of the application. The community board role is, again, we said the public hearing, right? So they have to have the meeting to discuss. They usually do this as a 2-for-1 deal where they discuss the application and then also hold a public hearing on the application. They have a duty to inform the public that that public hearing is taking place. So there's a lot of outreach to stakeholders, including business owners, neighbors, whoever else might be impacted by the proposed actions in an application. And then they also issue a recommendation, right? And so this part of the ULURP process really is meant to focus on the proposed action or actions in an application, not just the project that will result from it. So, a distinction here to make is if the action is to make a map change, then that is the action, right? And a project, again, could be essentially a consequence of that action would be a glass building that could be built in a particular area. There is an emphasis to look at really the planning rationale for the proposed actions and really sort of tailor the community board's recommendations so that it really gets at that aspect of the application. They can also consider the impacts of proposed action and also oftentimes, especially when there is an application for a special permit, the zoning resolution will outline specific findings that have to be met by the applicant in order for that permit to be granted. So it's important to call back to those requirements that are in the zoning resolution. And then finally, the community board does have that institutional knowledge really to allow for a follow through of any commitments that are made as part of a ULURP application or really just the project itself to ensure that the comments that were made and the commitments that were made by the applicant team, are addressed. And that's one of the reasons why community boards are really important to the land use process. The borough president similarly will review the application in terms of the findings that are outlined in the zoning resolution and also look at the planning rationale and policy implications of the proposal. We look at the environmental impacts of proposed action, and we pay very close attention to the concerns from different stakeholders in a community. As I mentioned earlier, we have the opportunity to hold a public hearing in instances where there is an application that is going to affect more than one community board. We do hold a borough board vote on the matter. And the recommendation then is forwarded to the members of the City Planning Commission. The City Planning Commission is a 13-member body. It is comprised of 7 mayoral appointees, 5 appointees, 1 by each borough president, and 1 appointee from the Public Advocate's Office. They hold regular public meetings as well as public hearings, and those usually happen on Mondays and Wednesdays, every other Monday and every other Wednesday, respectively. They vote on different land use issues that are subject to city regulation. And just to note that the chair of the City Planning Commission also serves as the director of the Department of City Planning. And as I mentioned earlier, they also have the authority to modify land use applications. The City Council, again, has a role in the process. They sort of will look at applications through 3 of their land use subcommittees, depending on what the proposed actions are in an application. It can be either the Landmarks, Public Siting and Maritime Uses subcommittee, Planning, Dispositions and Concessions, and then finally there's the Zoning and Franchises subcommittee. The Land Use Committee has oversight of the City Planning Commission, the Department of City Planning, the Department of Information Technology and Telecommunications, the Landmarks Preservation Commission, and also does general land use and landmarks review. From there, the application then moves to the full City Council, and at a stated meeting, the City Council then votes on that land use application. So that is, I will stop the share there, and we want to move on to the next presenter, or I don't know if we're doing questions at this point.
Sorry. Thank you, Lizette. That was really helpful. As everyone can tell, this is a complex process, and it really helps to understand it, to know how to engage in this process if you wish to challenge a development in your neighborhood or on your block. And our next, our first case study will demonstrate that. We have a recorded interview with Sean Corrandi, who is the Executive Director of Landmark West. And he's going to share with us how Landmark West is, where they are in the pre-ULURP process to amend the special Lincoln Square district. So, which is where the ABC Disney campus has been purchased and is going to be developed. So, Chris, can you roll that recording? Sean had a conflict tonight and couldn't be here in person. We recorded him earlier last week, actually.
Okay.
Hi, Sean. Thanks so much for taking time today to record this interview. I know our audience is very interested in hearing about what Landmark West is doing to amend the Lincoln Square Special District. I understand you're going to walk us through the website for Landmark West, and that will provide a lot of information and help our audience understand how they can engage with Landmark West. So I'm going to just hand this over to you now.
Of course. Thank you, Liz. Thank you, Chris, the entire coalition, and my apologies to all of the guests and the other panelists. We did have a conflict tonight with one of our own pre-scheduled events, so I'm happy to be with you here in a pre-recorded fashion. So my name is Sean Corrandi. I'm the Executive Director of Landmark West. I've been with Landmark West about 7 years, and in that time, almost from the start, we started seeing a change in the landscape in the neighborhood, largely the creep of Billionaires Row or the threat of it. So what I'd like to do is tell you more about us. We're 35 years old, and we've mainly focused on enhanced preservation and landmarking of the district for greater protections. We've worked with contextual zoning, and we've worked in other land use areas, but we're starting to see that the game has changed. Landmarks don't necessarily have the same protections they once did. While they do under the law, the interpretations have evolved over time. And we've started to expand our toolbox of how we protect and shape the built environment of the Upper West Side. So for that, one of our best tools that I can share with you is our website, which has plenty of content. It's updated on a regular basis. And you can start to see a lot of our current events here. We're a three-pronged organization. There's myself, my colleague Andra, who does a lot of our events, and my colleague Sarah, who runs our children's education program. Under our advocacy, you can see several things, in particular super talls. And this started with the creep of Billionaires Row, 57th Street, which was impacting the skyline and changing the feel of the neighborhood. It was impacting our special assets like our scenic landmark, Central Park. And it was also affecting our streets, right? We saw ice falling, building parts falling, cranes swinging in storms. And it really started to impact the stores that were doing business there, who could walk on those streets, and our own resources. As we saw more emergency response literally cordoning off those streets for days at a time. So this is a website that we built to walk everybody through how we got tall, the history of growth and large buildings in New York City. New York City has been home to some of the tallest buildings in the world. In the last year, we had 2 of the tallest buildings top out that were built on on our planet. And a lot of these explain what the concerns are, what you can do about it. And we have other information on the side here about other super talls citywide. I want to focus at the top here, the ones that are mainly in our district, and particularly ABC. And ABC, as many of you know, the American Broadcasting Company was purchased by the Walt Disney Company years ago, and in part to finance their acquisition of 20th Century Fox, they made a deal to sell the Upper West Side campuses of ABC. They're moving downtown to an area called Hudson Square. They're building a new campus designed by Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill, and they will vacate a significant amount of property. There's in fact 2 campuses. There's one on West End Avenue, which has already been flipped. But the one that we're most concerned about is the one on the Park block between Columbus and Central Park West. And as it happens, I'm going to quickly scroll down to show you on our website. This is landmarkwest.org/ABC. This is the block itself. The green marks the park. Everything that's in gold is a landmark. Everything that's in red is the ABC lot. So this red line identifies a 2.4 acre site. And that's significant because this means that zoning lot mergers are not something they have to deal with. Transfer of development rights, the development that they have can largely move freely along this lot. While these buildings are in gold, number 30 and also the Durland Writing Academy, this is where they filmed The View and a few other shows, cannot really be demolished in full or in totality. They can be altered as landmarks. That leaves building number 47, the Barbara Walters building, their headquarters building, the ABC News building, and the Live with Kelly and Ryan building, these 4 buildings in play. And this was flipped to a developer called Larry Silverstein of Silverstein Properties. You'll know this developer because they're the ones who have the controlling interest of the World Trade Center site. They like to build big. And partly, one question is, are these landmark-worthy buildings? They're all designed by a firm named KPF, Kohn Pedersen Fox, who's also built large buildings across the globe. But in and of themselves, we don't feel that they've raised to the standard yet of what would be a landmark, although many of them are of age. And we looked at how a potential reuse might go. This headquarters building is quite large, but the plates are so deep that it really wouldn't work for a residential conversion. And we don't foresee another flagship television station needing such space on the Upper West Side. So we fully expect all 4 of these buildings to be demolished. And this is about keeping an ear to the ground, being early in the process, paying attention to what's going on, and then reacting appropriately. We're fighting a ghost right now, in a sense. It's hard to get people excited or concerned about something that's not really a threat. Just as if you look at the history of Billionaires Row, a lot of those buildings were in process for 7 years before they even started to impact the skyline, that people noticed, how did this happen? How did they get this big? How can we stop it? And the answer is, at that point, it's too late. So we're really at the forefront of this, and it's partly hard to get people worried, as I mentioned, about something they can't see. So what we did is we did an analysis of what's here, the underlying zoning, and what could be built. And that's what we show at the top of our site here. When you look at this, the special within the rules of the current district, there's several parts of underlying zoning here. There's the historic district. There's an adjacent Lincoln Square Special Zoning District, which was created originally in 1969 to preserve the unique character of this area. There are different special districts throughout the city. There's one for the seaport, for example, to maintain that sense of place. Here, there is one to sort of encourage the same types of buildings and atmosphere, and also business that goes on within the Lincoln Square area. You'll notice that the ABC block is carved out. This was originally planned in 1969, and ABC was carved out then. And ABC has been present on the site since, at least in various forms, 1955. So they predate the Lincoln Square zoning. But what you'll see is that in 1993, they pushed hard not to be included when this zoning district was amended. And partly it's because they have so much commercial use. What we're proposing here is this red line. By extending this line up through the block and this line over across 67th Street, we're be encapsulating the majority of this block within the Lincoln Square Special Zoning District. And we're talking about giving that a rating of C. And C applies to various different buildings within the district already predestined. We're looking for a zoning map change. We're not looking to take away floor area from the developer. We're not looking to take away 1 square inch. What we're looking to do is inform the form that these buildings take. So if our change goes through, as I mentioned, with extending the Lincoln Square district, we would see something along the scale of this. The pink is the existing and the yellow would be a massing of the proposed. We don't expect this to be built. This is just a massing to show what could be built under the guidelines. These are still buildings that are about 30 stories tall. So it's still significant. Mind you, up until 200 Amsterdam was built, the Millennium Tower was the tallest building in the neighborhood, and this is about 545 feet. So we're looking at something that's closer to maybe 400 feet topping out, and it would be a tower on base. It's set back. When you think what's a tower on base, the Raymore and Flanagan building is a tower on base where it rises up a certain amount, there's a setback, and then the tower continues. That's if we take action. This is still a lot of development. This is still a lot of bulk. You can still see it has a huge impact on the Artist Colony block of West 67th Street. That's on the National Register, and within the Upper West Side Central Park West Historic District. And of course, architects can move things can change, but this is more or less the type of massing we're talking about. Gray would be mechanical space in both instances, which doesn't count towards their floor area. If we don't act, there's a potential for engineering to be the limit. What you can see here is a 2-tower approach. This is using available floor area, and it's called as of right, which means they wouldn't have to go to the community board. They wouldn't have to get a special permit. They wouldn't have to go to the Board of Standards and Appeals. If they so chose, they could tear down these non-landmark buildings, move around their floor area on the site as they wished because of the lack of other restrictions in a C47 district, and build these large towers. What we're envisioning would be a small retail base. This could be a big box retailer that we don't necessarily see on the Upper West Side because of the zoning, and 2 towers. What we envisioned with our consultant, George Janes, is staggered towers. They could be built in phases. The staggering, you can see one is more justified south. The other, phase 2 West Tower, is further north. This is just a presumption. These towers can move. Again, this is not real. Don't clear out your pension and start crying. But we're saying this is what could happen if we don't do anything. And why do we think this is possible? Because we've seen it. We've seen it elsewhere a few blocks away. So we're envisioning standard towers. These are 90 feet by 75 feet, which is a typical what we're seeing for more of these slender towers in Billionaires Row. We're looking at these gray stripes. This is a 25-foot mechanical floor. We're seeing them in standard frequency. This is all based on current assumptions of what we've seen built in the neighborhood. We're looking, in this case, as a 14-foot floor height, which is typical. We've seen a lot of buildings on Central Park South as a 16-foot 4-inch floor-to-floor typical. So in many ways, this is conservative. And we stopped these towers in this one at 1605 and the western one at 1230. Largely, the 1605 is based on the mechanical limit of elevators. And we've read several pieces by Stephanos Chen, who's on the beat for the New York Times, talking about whistling at 432 Park Avenue. People hear the walls creaking, the elevators are getting stuck in their shafts. And these are the same concerns, but this is what would happen, what could potentially happen in buildings of this scale. What we see here, though, is not necessarily affordable housing. We don't expect this to be partaking in any of the city plans of helping any of the inequities with the city. Again, this would be fully as of right. So this GIF that we're showing here, it's not to scare, but it's to warn and make people aware of this is completely possible under the current zoning. Now, these have already been altered. This is partly what we created for what's called a reasonable worst case development scenario, which we had to file with city planning as part of our pre-ULURP package. And this allowed us to review what could happen. We had initial pre-application meetings with DCP, followed up by a pre-application statement, a draft reasonable worst case scenario, and then we edited that. And we've also submitted that. So right now where we sit in the process is that Department of City Planning is reviewing this application has been sitting with them maybe since late April, early May, and it's really been stalled for the summer. We've asked the borough president and our council member, Helen Rosenthal, to check in on this. Partly, the stalemate is about changing in staffing and some staff turnover that hasn't been replaced. We're also at a strange part of the calendar. Obviously, November 2nd is election day, and December 31st would be our current mayor's last day in office. So we'd like to continue moving this along as much as we can. Time is always of the essence. At the same point, we have a luxury in this one case. Silverstein purchased the buildings from ABC, but did a 5-year sale leaseback. So although this purchase went through in July of 2018, we still have some time to have this zoning change, if it is to go through. And why are we doing a zoning change? We're trying to avoid litigation. We're trying to avoid lawsuits later. This is being on the offensive for once instead of being on the defensive. And that's hopefully going to save the community in the long run, give us a building that suits the community needs. And we're concerned, right? ABC is a business, but you'll see the weathermen, you'll see the newscasters, lots of the employees shopping on Columbus, picking up their lunch at Dig, going to the neighboring stores. And there's a certain life on the street and a vitality to the neighborhood that they bring. When they leave, if this just becomes a bedroom community or a place, as people have said for other areas, a safe deposit box for the rich to park some assets and be a few weeks out of the year, this is going to harm the stores nearby. This is going to harm the restaurants. It's not going to allow for the same traffic. And it's a question for the greater community. By investing in something that is more within reach to more people within the neighborhood, still of means likely, we're ensuring in a way, yes, there might be more people on the subway. Yes, there will likely be more children in schools, but there's also going to be more people in restaurants. There's going to be more people shopping in those stores, and they're going to keep the neighborhood alive. So right now, DCP is reviewing this. Once we get approval or feedback from this review, we can complete the ULURP process, application process, and this takes several months. There's a land use form, an environmental assessment we need to write, and ultimately city planning certification. After that begins the 7.5 month at best ULURP process, which Lizette mentioned to you already, which would include, again, city planning certification, community board review and approval, hopefully, or a president review and approval, hopefully, city planning review and approval, city council review and approval, and ultimately mayoral review and hopefully approval. At this rate, it likely will not be, because we don't have the 7-month timeline, it will be our next mayor. It will not be Bill de Blasio. So we're very positive about this so far, in part because when we met with city planning, we got real feedback, and it wasn't a hard, fast no. It wasn't stoic poker faces. It was this seems reasonable. This makes sense. This is what planning is here for. And we have literally a once in a lifetime. This isn't just a generation. ABC's been here since 1955, if not earlier. Opportunity to recast how this block, this transition piece between Lincoln Square and the Upper West Side residential neighborhoods works, and how that is it porous? Is it going to be a wall? Is it going to try to blend and meld the two areas, or is it going to be, a statement piece in its own right? So thus far, DCP has been positive. Our local council member, Helen Rosenthal, has been positive. The borough president has been positive. And one of the other areas we have to check is the community board. And in fact, we did a presentation to them in April, and they have agreed to join us as a co-applicant. So that is also positive. Where can this go off the rails? The City Planning Commission can always be swayed by the developer. As I mentioned, the developer is Silverstein Properties, who also happens to be the landlord of the Department of City Planning, an equitable building downtown. But we do feel good about this because it's contained. It doesn't have broader impacts. We're not trying to make a big change that would pull the rug out from under this. It's literally making it copacetic with the neighborhood and its surroundings. And these are surroundings based on findings that DCP itself wrote. And it's not, and most importantly, it's not a downzoning. As I mentioned, we're not taking a square inch of floor area away. It's just how they would apply that bulk on the site. And this, although still large, if fully realized, it would have less impacts on Central Park. It would not necessarily interrupt the Central Park West skyline, and it would help the neighboring community and not only the residences and neighbors, but also the businesses nearby. So that's why we're pushing for this.
That's great. Thank you so much, Sean. I'll let you know if any questions come in for you, but meanwhile, thank you very much for updating us on this project.
Thank you.
So one thing I'd like to mention before we move on to Olive is that we asked Sean after that interview, how does Landmark West engage with the community? How can block associations, community organizations, neighbors, residents engage with Landmark West? Because clearly they know the ULURP process and they know how to get things done. And he said that if your building, your block association wants to talk to Landmark West, they will come and talk to you. So if you're going to have a meeting about a building in your neighborhood that you want to fight or challenge or whatever, just email Sean and he'll get back to you. And his email address, I believe, is on their website. But if you send us a message, I'll get it to you. But okay, so let's move on. In Sean's presentation, he mentioned 200 Amsterdam Avenue, which is now the tallest building on the Upper West Side. And we're going to hear next from Olive Freud. Olive is the president of the Committee for Environmentally Sound Development. And she's a community activist of long standing here on the Upper West Side. And today she's going to tell us how she spearheaded community efforts to shave multiple stories off of 200 Amsterdam Avenue. So now I'm going to hand it over to Olive, and all of you are on mute. So you need to unmute, please. And I guess I'll ask Dee if any questions are coming in on the chat room that we should know about while Olive unmutes. There we go.
Okay.
Okay, take it away, Olive.
Yeah, well, just a few words about my organization. We're the Committee for Environmentally Sound Development. We've been around for 35 years. We've had some successes, you may remember. Damrosch Park in Lincoln Center. It's a 2.4 acre park, and Lincoln Center wanted to change the park for their use, make it commercial. We took the lawsuit, and nobody believed it, but we won that one. We've lost a lot of lawsuits. We've lost a lot of things that we try to do. And the other big win, I think, is that we connected Riverside Drive to Riverside Boulevard at 72nd Street. That was a big thing for traffic. And then we took up 200 Amsterdam Avenue. Well, it's a land use problem. I guess I just want to put it in the right sense that when you're talking about land use, how much do you want for residential? Consider density, air, sunshine, avoiding shadowage. How much commercial space? How much open space, parks and recreation? Consider traffic and congestion. What should our city look like to be suitable and welcome for humans? The Upper West Side had the right mix and people want to join us. But the real lesson should be make more neighborhoods look like ours. One big factor is that the people on the Upper West Side care, are outspoken and willing to fight. And I have to say that I'm very grateful to the people on the Upper West Side who stood by us for this. In our neighborhood.
Olive, this is Liz. Can I ask you to move your computer a little bit so that your face is in the center screen?
Okay.
Thank you very much. That's perfect.
In our neighborhood, there's an understanding that on the streets, buildings are brownstones, 4 or 5 stories. I don't think more than 70 feet. And that on the avenue, the older buildings are 12 to 15 feet, 150 stories, 150 feet. And then there's Lincoln Towers, which is very important because this whole thing takes place in the Lincoln Tower neighborhood. They did go up to 30 stories, 300 feet. There had always been this understanding that to get the height, you take the number of stories, you multiply by 10, and you have the height of the building. So Lincoln Towers is 30 stories, 300 feet. And there is no control on height other than that understanding. The number of stories is computed by the zoning area, the square footage in the zoning area. The full effect of this became terribly obvious when the super talls invaded the Upper West Side. When they came in and they said they had a 52-story building and it's going to be 668 feet tall. Well, Lincoln Towers is 30 stories and it's 300 feet. This is 52 stories. Where did they get 52 stories? And it's 668 feet. It was an outrage. How did they get this through the Department of Buildings? What was going on here? And we called a big meeting. Everybody was outraged, and nobody really understood what was going on. So we had to get the experts. First came the explanation of zoning lots expansion. There had been a ruling that if a developer was putting up a construction on his lot and the one next to him had a construction that didn't use up all of their space, their air space, he could buy it from them. But it's the adjacent space that he could buy the air rights from. This developer understood adjacent to be adjacent to the adjacent. And I guess all of you live on the West Side, you know what Lincoln Towers looks like. It has driveways and gardens and all that. And his zoning lot became the gerrymandered zoning lot. I didn't realize I could put up pictures, or maybe most of you know what this looks like. It was a 37-sided gerrymandered lot. He went from the gardens to the parking spaces, and a 10,000 square foot lot that he owned became 110,000 square feet. And he figured it out that he could have 52 stories. But the next problem was that we had to understand. If it was 52 stories, then it should be 520 feet. Why was it 668 feet? That was another problem. And let's see, how did he explain that? Oh, yes. That was because after Superstorm Sandy, the buildings on the low-lying edges of the boroughs were inundated. So they allowed, they said that those buildings could take all the mechanics, everything out of the basements and put them high up. I would have suggested that you don't build in low-lying areas, but that wasn't what was going to happen. They were going to build in low-lying areas and put the mechanics. Well, the developer decided that if these buildings could take all their mechanics and parts and boilers, whatever you want, out of the basement and put them up, they would do that also. And then when you put all these things high up, you can't use the 10-foot floor to ceiling. You've got to make it 12, 16 feet. And then came the whole idea of voids. So if you go from 552 to 668, you see the enormous voids in the building. But of course, there was never a challenge, and there should have been a challenge. Where do voids come from? Whose idea was that? We seem to have accepted it, except that I don't accept it.
So
All
Olive,
right.
how did your organization fight this?
Well, that's what I'm coming to. Back in 2017, when George Janes and Frank Cheney, our land experts, identified a flawed zoning lot and questionable open space provisions in the developer's initial plan, when 200 Amsterdam was just a hole in the ground, and at this point, we are my committee and the Municipal Art Society, notified the Department of Building. We started an Article 78 procedure and the developer that the zoning lot was illegal and that therefore the bulk of the building exceeded what the zoning resolution permitted. We also informed the city that the rules governing light, air, and open space were being compromised, and that this community would seek legal recourse to right these wrongs. We started on this Article 78 procedure. The construction nonetheless proceeded. Since then, an abused and outraged community has fought the idea that this was a done deal put forth by greedy developers and supported by compliant city administration. That's how you started. It took 2 years and expensive administrative hearings, appeals to the Department of Building, and more appeals to the Board of Standards and Appeals, before Justice Perry ordered the Department of Building to revoke its permit and the developer to remove floors that exceeded bulk permits under the zoning regulation. Everyone was terribly happy with this. And I must say that Judge Perry, we really have to, he looked into the problem. He really read our piece. He read all the laws. He came up with the right solution. But after having won with the Supreme Court, the other side, the developer, took an appeal to the appellate division. We didn't do well there. We were very disappointed with the appellate division justices. They overruled Judge Perry. Their argument was that the developer, that the language pertaining to the purchase of the rights was ambiguous, even though no other developer had ever misinterpreted the language. The use of air rights from one building adjacent to it, I think it was used about 1,700 times. No other developer, well, maybe I should say 4 or 5, maybe did something about using more than adjacent. But it was, no one ever thought of doing a gerrymandered zoning area the way they had here at 200 Amsterdam. Therefore, the problem was brought to the attention of DOB, or had never, because no one had ever done it. The problem had never been brought to the DOB. And the DOB had never been in any litigation. We were the first to bring it up. And their argument also extended litigation by introducing new issues, because they didn't want to talk about the gerrymandered zoning lot. They talked about ambiguity, deference, mootness, financial hardship, and threatening groups throughout the city. We didn't do well with the appellate division. And the only thing then was that we would have to go to the Court of Appeals. The original intent of these zoning regulations was to allow unused air rights from adjoining buildings to be purchased and used in adding height to a planned construction. It took gall for a developer to claim that its 39 size zoning lot from non-adjacent and partial zoning lots is illegal. It is inconceivable that zoning regulations regarding air rights were meant to allow a 10,000 square foot zoning lot to expand to 110 feet. They never intended to permit a building on this small footprint to rise 668 feet, totally totally out of context with the surrounding 300-foot high Lincoln Tower buildings. To hoist apartments to more profitable heights, developers also placed mechanics until now in the basement in mid-buildings, taking up from 100 to 200 feet in this building. So that was the explanation of how they got to 668 feet. What happened after that? Well, we started in 2017. And by the time it was March in 2021 that we finally then brought our appeal to the Court of Appeals, and they came back and said that they wouldn't give us a hearing. So it was a tremendous disappointment. It was a disappointment, and at this point, I think only in September we got I'm getting mixed up with the dates. I think in September we just got their notice that they would not hear it. We're thinking about what we should do. I wanted to say something on the brighter side, though. It was so outrageous the way they got the zoning area together, that the Department of Buildings agreed with us. And they said, adjacent means the adjacent building. You can't go gerrymandering and you can't go wandering around a lot. That saves places like Stuyvesant Town who could be threatened. They have a little green here and there, or the Amsterdam houses. Any of those buildings, the tall buildings with the green grass around or the parking lot, are threatened. But they aren't anymore. I'm just talking to Gail Brewer's office, and she said the text had been changed. I haven't seen the change. I asked her to send it to me. So maybe we got a little bit of something on it, but it was a great disappointment. It really was. And we've been searching and thinking, is there anything else that we can do? The city is helping developers. The city's on their back, and communities are suffering. And it's not only our 200 Amsterdam, maybe we started, we gave heart to other communities. And I think, what was it I wanted to show you? Oh, here, yes. With the gerrymandered zoning, voids, cantilevers, and rezoning, the future of our city, density and height, are out of control for the people who live here. There has been awareness and outcry through the city. Ours is not the only complaint. And I compiled all the other things that are going on in the city. 35 West 66. Excel proposed a 35-story building, which would normally be 350 feet. However, by creating voids and height, went to 750 feet. That's right here in our neighborhood. The voids contain mechanicals, which don't count against bulk. I could explain that more, but this was allowed because mechanicals were always in the basement. The basements will now have other uses. 91 91st and Broadway, a massive cantilevered building. 310 East 67th Street, the Blood Center. That's a very important one because it's on the street and they want to put up a 300-story building there. What will that do to the rest of us? What a precedence that sets. They're in the middle of litigation. I don't know if they're in litigation or they're just complaining. They're certainly having a lot of protests. 97th Street, Park West Village. That we lost. There's supposed to be certain outside space. The building goes on, can use what percentage of a lot, and then there has to be something else on the lot, and they didn't have it. So they said, well, they're going to put a garden on top of a building, and that will count for the outside space. And they got away with it.
Okay.
Soho and NoHo, Chinatown, rezoning 56 blocks for increased density and mega chain stores. Inwood, this is done. 59 blocks, they rezoned 59 blocks of low-rise areas, have been rezoned, and they're going to allow 30-story buildings going up there. East River Park, they're carrying on there a lot. They're going to lose their park. Trees have been removed. They're giving all kinds of excuses, but the people there don't like it. Elizabeth Street Gardens. These are all small communities that are acting up. They're not just taking it. 103rd Street, Felix Bam Historic District. They certified 130 stories in a 19th century narrow landmark street next to the Williams Bridge banking building. Gowanus is a 82 block rezoning proposal for low-lying area in a floodplain that the EPA labeled toxic in order to build housing for, I don't know if it's for 8,000 people or for 8,000 units.
So
They are-
Olive, can I
Yes,
ask you a question? People can get your newsletter to read about these, right?
yes. I would
Okay.
love to. I didn't realize that I could put it on here. You can get
Well,
my
let's
newsletter
put
you
it-
want, and I'd love everyone to see, if you haven't, what
Great.
that gerrymandered zoning looked like. That was the biggest outrage ever pulled on us.
All right, we'll put the information up. We already put the information up in the chat room about your organization, the Committee for Environmentally Sound Development. And so people can contact you through there to ask for your newsletter. Okay?
That's the last one. I don't know what's going to happen to us now. We're really so unhappy and disappointed. You don't want to give up because you know you're right. And maybe you have a new governor and you have a new mayor. And maybe somebody can think of anything that we can do about this. But the lawyers have such long faces. They said they won't take your case. And that's it.
Well, maybe somebody who's listening to this call will have an idea. Get in touch with you,
Oh, I
okay?
hope so.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Olive. That was really interesting. We're going to move on to our last case tonight. We're going to hear from the president of the West 69th Street Block Association about how they have suffered, for lack of a better word, during the construction of what is called an iceberg house. And so, Eileen, I think you have a presentation that you would like to share. And you're on mute, Eileen.
It says host has disabled attendee screen sharing.
You're on mute, Chris.
I'll fix the screen sharing.
Okay. Do you want to give a little intro, Eileen?
So this is, very different. Everybody's going up and complaining about everybody going up and creating these, very tall buildings, but we're kind of the opposite. You can't go up because you're landmarked, but you still want, 15,000 more square feet. So you go down. So that's what I'm going to talk about during this.
And this is a residential property.
It's two residential properties that are being joined together. So let me see if you get this. Okay, do you guys see that? No. Okay.
Not yet.
Nope, this may not work.
Eileen, I can share your document if you want.
Yeah, if you want to do it as presentation 1, I may have made some changes, but that's fine. So since 2016, just to get us started, since 2016, the residents of West 69th Street have lived with the demolition, disposal, and rebuild of a mega mansion on a double lot. The property owners are joining, there we go. The property owners are joining 2 townhouses, number 48 and number 50, into one large mega mansion. This is lengthy and disruptive construction is not about a pool. It's about creating more living space because the property's facade is landmarked. This means they cannot build up, so they dig down to create more living space. This is called an iceberg house. The construction has been continuous, dangerous, disruptive, and lacking of any measure of consideration or compassion for others that live on the block. We are fully aware that property owners have the right to renovate their homes, but over the past 6 years, we have found that there are very few laws or resources to protect those who live in the vicinity of the construction, whether it be inches or yards. We also know we can't count on people to be good neighbors. Are you clicking or am I, Chris?
I'll click. I just need your cue.
All right, click. Okay, so this is the history of this. On the left, you see number 48. That was a single family townhouse. And just a bit of trivia, the guy who owned it was actually a Kung Fu movie distributor. Purchased by Urzuli LLC, November 2011 for $11.5 million. It was a pied-à-terre. And with that purchase, they had a rent-regulated tenant in the bottom apartment. So they basically inherited this tenant when they bought this house. The townhouse on the right was a 13-unit multi-dwelling for decades. It was on the market for just 19 days, and the contract was signed with Urzuli LLC. They bought in November 2012 for $13 million. It remained empty and in disrepair after the purchase. Slide. Meet Malou Beauvoir and Pierre Bastide. These are the people behind Urzuli LLC. Malou grew up in New York. She worked in finance. That's how she met her husband. And now she's a singer. Pierre Bastide, is French. He made his money in energy. He has boutique hotels. He also works in biotech, and he sits on several boards. Slide. So the timeline is 2011. 48 West 69th Street is purchased by Urzuli LLC for $11 million. They are not permanent residents, and they only visit a few times a year. 2012, 50 West 69th Street, directly west of 48, is purchased by Urzuli LLC for $13 million. It is on the market for only 19 days, and this is less than 1 year from the purchase of number 48. 2014, plans are submitted to New York City government agencies and approved. CB7 recommends changing a proposed Juliet balcony. 2015, Urzuli LLC purchases 36 West 71st Street in order to relocate the tenant they inherited on 69th Street. And they need to relocate that tenant because they have to start construction on their project. So they buy 36 West 71st Street for $14 million. They have now spent close to $40 million on 3 townhouses in 4 years. 2016, the new proposed plans are sent to New York City government agencies and are approved. These new plans have significant changes in them. This is clearly an iceberg house. Slide. Look where the yellow arrow is. That's the basement and cellar. Slide. This is what's proposed in 2016. And now we have what's approved and a graphic problem. And slide. Timeline continued, 2017, October. At this point, we have significant noise, environmental issues and concerns daily from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. December 2018, the Block Association has its initial meeting with project manager to address issues. He just kind of wants us to make sure people don't call 311. There's no talk about look aheads, communication, anything like that. I do have a little bit of communication with him, but not anything that's really rewarding or building any kind of cooperative relationship. In March, we have the letters written to the owners. The reason that the Block Association wrote a letter to the owner was because we really felt, look, when you're this wealthy, they may not even be aware that we're having these issues on the street. They have lots of people working from them. All they know is they have this vision of a beautiful house. They don't know how it's going to get constructed. So let's give them the benefit of the doubt. And we do. And the woman Malou winds up calling me and says, this was never our intentions. This is going to be our home. We love West 69th Street. This is where we're going to be forever. Then in April, the New York Times article comes out. And we get picked up by all of these other newspapers around the world, but it's actually just one news cycle. It really doesn't last. It's the big flash and then it's over. Everybody's on to the next story. So we did get a record amount of comments on the New York Times article, but it wasn't as wonderful as we thought it was going to be. But their identities are exposed, which is good. And Miss Bouvard tweets fake news, which is a clear indication she doesn't know her neighbors. The building now becomes like a tourist site, and we have an astronomical amount of people who are coming by to look at it and see it. And slide, Chris. This little sign pops up, and this really makes the owners mad. This pops up directly across the street. And this really makes them upset. And their project manager insists that it be taken down and says, this has to go, make it go away. You should cooperate. And it doesn't go away. Next slide, please. So these are some of the problems we face. We have cranes, we have cement trucks idling on Columbus Avenue to wait to come up to 69th Street. We have the porta potty cleaning guy who comes every day, workers urinating on the street, dump those large metal containers. They were averaging changing them out to a day at one point. We have cement in the gutters and environmental items in the gutter, dust. They don't hose down. They take up parking. We've had explosions on the street because they use a rock expander. We've had residents who literally have been in the last stages of life and died in their apartments with emissions from the construction vehicles. Slide. So the things that we have done to fight against this is we've attempted to communicate with the parties. We sent the letter. I was talking to the project manager, and that all hit a wall. We sought legal advice, and two attorneys told us it's $15,000 just for us to start looking at this. We sought sound technology advice. The guy told us it was $5,000 to set something up for a week. We don't have that kind of money, and even if we could fundraise for it, then you're continuously fundraising for that. With the help of Arlene Bronzev, who's a leading consultant for public policy in New York City on noise, she was able to help me get contacts at the Department of Environmental Protection, and I got them on 3 different roofs on West 69th Street and West 68th Street on 3 different times and it still wasn't enough for them to violate the noise. We presented a petition about excess variances on to CB7, and we actually won. They would like to get variances every Saturday so that they can do whatever little work they need to do, not big things that you really need to work on a Saturday. So for example, you really need to have a crane on a Saturday, but you don't need to, build a frame for something on a Saturday. So we actually had a lot of success with that with CB7, and we won that. And we talked to the reporter about for the article. Slide. So what we've learned about zoning is there doesn't seem to be any real laws that protect residential streets against construction of this magnitude. So I like to tell people we have Midtown construction on a residential side street. They dug down 38 feet into metamorphic rock using hydraulic equipment. So we had noise, tapping noise for a year, dust, everything. We have spoken to CB7 and local politicians regarding zoning, but they all fall under as a right. It's their house, they get to do what they want. There's no law against digging down 38 feet. We did find one loophole, and it was in the paperwork. So in the paperwork, they have it down as a renovation, but it's really a complete rebuild, right? Because they took everything down that was behind the facade. But one of the loopholes that these people use is they'll say, yeah, it's a renovation. We're going to take out everything in between the front wall and the back wall. And then suddenly the back wall's gone, and they'll say, well, that back wall, it was just so wobbly and it looked like it was going to come down. So the safest thing was to make sure it came down safely. That's what we did. So that's a little loophole, because they told the truth when they filed it's a renovation, but suddenly it's a complete rebuild because of that bad wall. My dream law is that a construction project of this magnitude never ever happens again on a residential side street. I don't know how we make that happen besides agitating and fighting. But it's been 6 years. They're not supposed to be done until third quarter 2023. We still have noise daily, which is probably the biggest problem. We have people who do Zoom calls and work calls in their bathroom because that's the only place where they have quiet and they can be on the phone. We have, like I said, people who wear headphones that you use at a shooting range because the noise has been so loud in the past. It's really, the noise has been unbelievable and constant since 2016. If it's not demolition, it's workers dropping things, trucks idling, honking, and dust, pollution, all those other things that you would imagine are issues that we have. Slide. So we learned that they will try to take advantage of working hours, variances, environmental laws. If they think they can get away with it, they will try. They try to work through the pandemic. After they used to work from 8 to 4. After the pandemic, they suddenly started working 7 to 4. And we know that's to make up for lost time on the pandemic. Small items, I've been able to talk to the superintendent about the project, and those do get resolved. But more often we have to contact government agencies by calling 311. And if you can't call 311 and say it's noise, because then they send out the police and the police close it. You have to say it's noise from construction. Then they send out the DOB, but when the DOB comes by, there's no more noise because everyone's gone home, and then the case is closed out. So that's very difficult because whoever the inspector is for the DEB or the DOB, they have to see it at that time. The construction task force, the somewhat communication I had with their project manager was helpful, but it was never fully forthcoming. There was never like, this is our schedule, this is what we're doing next week. Are there any concerns in the neighborhood? It was like, can you please get the porta potty off of the sidewalk? Or how come there's an extension cord running across the street? Okay, I'll take care of that. Make sure nobody calls 311. And he really was just like, can you please tell people not to call 311? No, I can't do that. Slide. So what you can do is it really was like what Sean was saying, like you have to pay attention, you have to be vigilant, because before you know it, everything's in place and everything's going to start. So for us, this started, and there wasn't a lot of communication and notification from CB7. There was like 2 signs put up, and CB7 was like, well, that other building's derelict anyway, so somebody should do something with it. Nobody ever communicated the block association. And even if they did, we don't know, what does that mean when you're going to excavate 38 feet? That's what I always say to people. What does that mean? So you have to be ever vigilant. You have to pay attention to the permits that are being issued on your street, notices by CB7, any government agency. You have to pay attention. We really got caught not paying attention to this, and this is where we are because of it. Be on top of it. Things get approved really, really fast because they have expediters or because no one's paying attention. Speak up. When we spoke up at the community board, it got their attention. The second time we went about the variance, it was even a better experience of them helping us. Demand your local leaders and government agencies communicate with items on the calendar. It would have been lovely if we had received, as a block association, and we're a pretty popular block association, more communication that this was happening. Expose people for their bad deeds. I have to tell you, that little sign really, really bothers them. And it keeps people coming by the street. It engages people in conversation, and it keeps the word going about what's going on. And I can't see the last thing. Attempt to build relationships. So if something like this happens, yeah, you should attempt to build a relationship with the other party, and hopefully it will be better than our experience was, and that would be helpful. But really, in the end, you just have to pay attention to what's going on and agitate and make your voice known. Slide. So be vigilant about the permits. I think we already did this. I think we're at the end of the slides.
That was
Yes?
the last slide.
Okay. So yeah, that's it.
So Eileen, how do you find out what construction permits are being, going before government agencies?
So you can actually sign up with the DOB, and there's actually alerts that they can send you. But I'm not just talking about like permits, like pay attention to what's for sale on your street. There's 3 townhouses for sale on 70th Street at one point. Like what's going on with there was a building for sale on our street down closer to the other end of the block. We paid a lot of attention to it. So I actually put an alert in with the DOB, and sure enough, those permits started popping up, and I got copies of it, and I sent it to a friend who's an architect. I'm like, what are they doing here? Are they going to dig? And he was like, no, this is what they're going to do. Okay, good. But if something else comes up, I'll get a permit. I'll get a notification. But it's
Okay.
also checking with, CB7's monthly calendar and their committee calendars, checking with Landmarks Commission. It's exhausting. I'm not going to lie. It's absolutely exhausting.
I know, is there anything else that you'd like to say, Eileen?
I don't begrudge anybody the opportunity to build their dream home at all, and how lucky for them that they can do that. However, you live in an incredibly dense area, and people literally live on the other side of you on a wall, and you're digging down 38 feet. And when you're doing that, you have to say, what does that mean? What does that mean for the person next to me, the person behind me? 69th Street is not the only block that suffered. 68th Street suffered tremendously because there was nothing behind the facade. At least we had the facade. But you have to think about it. What does it mean?
Okay, great. I know we are running over, but I wanted to ask the coalition members who are in the Zoom room, if they have any questions for anybody, or if they'd like to say anything. Okay, I think people, Steve, yes, you're on mute.
I just want to say that in our community, this is an issue that is talked about by so many people about what's happening, what's being built, what's our role in it. And Olive, you may not have been successful with all the fights, but you're an inspiration for us about a community engagement. And we are still in the fight for what we believe is important to preserve in our community and to fix what's wrong. And your actions should hopefully inspire those of us who are engaged on these issues to keep up and to be more attentive and to learn more. The process is confusing. And when government tells us all these slogans and process that we need to follow, it pushes us away. We've got to lean in because these are key issues for our community and they're not going away. And it's good to hear stories of success, but stories that didn't work out the way we had hoped for are also learning moments, teaching moments. And Olive, you've taught us, and now we've got to do the work and be out there. If not, shame on us. So thanks so much to all who have contributed.
Right,
Right.
thank you, Eileen and Olive. Lizette had to leave, but I guess we'll wrap it up for this evening.
Yeah.
I just wanted to answer him. I really think that having gone, all of our elected officials were with us and all that, but we have to get a different kind of administration. They're not with us. The city doesn't represent the people. And where do these rules come from? The mayor wants tall buildings.
Yeah.
It really is fundamentally a democracy, and you have to vote for the people who are going to represent you.
Yeah, and I think we have to take to the streets, to be honest with you, make a human chain on the street so that these folks know that until they understand that people live there and should be respected, that they can't continue to work. And we band together as block associations to get the message across. Because that's unacceptable. What Eileen was describing is completely unacceptable, that one family could hold a community hostage and affect the quality of their life to that degree. I'm sorry, that is insane. And we have to get out there and stop it. I don't care how much money they have. It is not right.
Well, it might be good to reach out to the newly elected next year and as a community, push for more community-based planning. I mean, maybe that's a step.
I'll jump in. I suppose that the programming committee will look at 2022 and perhaps invite the newly elected folks to come visit our coalition and talk about issues like this.
Yeah.
That said, it's been we are a little bit over time, and this has been an awesome meeting. Thank you, panel. Thank you, Olive. Thank you, Eileen. Well, thank you, Landmark West and Lizette, for your contributions. This meeting will continue on the third Wednesday of the month for the balance of the year. That means the next meeting will be November 17th. At that meeting, we plan on having Save Our Stores come and talk about what they've learned about retail issues on the ground throughout our community. And the last meeting of the year will be December 15th. I think we're still planning on an information session on congestion pricing at that meeting. And unless anybody has any other community news to share, I'll, Saturday, early voting begins. So vote early and vote often. And unless there is any other news to share, I look for a motion to adjourn. Got it. Thank you all. Have a good night. And we'll follow up with all this great information.
Yep.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.